All right. So, Jesse, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Jesse Weeks. I'm a sergeant with the Toronto Police. I currently work at the Toronto Police College as an instructor, where I mainly focus on instructing brand new recruits. And also, I facilitate the coach officer course with another supervisor here.
Okay. So, am I correct to assume that you're at the college right now?
I am. I'm in the college boardroom
Okay. Oh, it looks very boardroom-esque, and I just assumed
very
that that's
much.
where you were. Okay. So, how long have you been with the service for, and how long have you been at the college doing your current role?
So I've been with the police service for almost 21 years now, and I've been at the police college for about a year and a half.
Okay. And what are you teaching to these new recruits?
I focus on note taking, memo books, some of the basics initially, and then I build on that with statement taking.
Okay.
And I also piggyback on some other topics. We share a bunch of topics here with the team, but I teach courtroom awareness, criminal code. I get very involved with the practicals. I'm
Hmm.
trying to, our team is really working together to try to renew a lot of the training and update it because of the fact that we have body worn cameras, which are such a big part of policing now, as
Mhm.
well as our connected phones, as well as an application on the connected phone that works in conjunction with the camera.
Oh,
So this is all technology that exists, and our team is doing our best effort now to incorporate that into the training.
okay. So, like, it's interesting to me that on one hand, you're talking about body worn cameras, like police officers walking around recording everything in the car, outside, whatever. And then you're also talking about note taking, which seems like such an archaic practice, but it's something that we hear about in the public realm quite a bit. And of course, as somebody who sat in on many, many court cases, I've seen officers refer to their notes. Tell me, like, what's up with this note taking still? How does it still happen? Do you guys still have your little memo pads that you're having to scratch down every little detail of every interaction?
So yes and no, we do still have the memo books, the written note. No, we don't scratch down every single detail of the day. So that's also a work in progress here at the college as far as best practices that we're telling to the cadets.
Mhm.
We work in conjunction with the sergeant who oversees the body worn camera training. And those are conversations that we're having a lot with him as well.
Mhm.
So for example, we know that digital notes is coming down the road. We
Mhm.
know that the body camera footage transcribes all the audio.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's some tools that really alleviate some of the note-taking burdens that have been traditional to police.
Mhm.
However, the body camera doesn't capture an officer's perception and thoughts
Right.
that are happening during a dynamic situation.
Yeah.
If an officer is involved in a use of force type situation where things are happening really quickly, yeah, the body camera will show a pretty accurate picture as to what happened, but it's not going to explain the officer's perception, and it's not going to explain why the officer did what they did or didn't do
Mhm.
something. And so that's where right now the written note still works in conjunction to the cameras, and the way that our procedures are currently written is such that the body cameras are actually a supplement to our physical written notes,
Hmm.
as opposed to the other way around, which is
Yeah.
maybe where we're going at some point as we
Yeah.
move towards digital notes and all the notes being taken on the connected phone or some sort of other tablet device, perhaps. So yeah, these are all things that are being discussed by multiple units and a lot of meetings.
Hmm.
There's also the management of all that data from the video cameras. That's a big task,
Hmm.
and then the disclosure of evidence and a lot of the video footage as well. That's another uh, difficult task
Yeah.
that
Gargantuan, really,
some other
right?
folks here at the college are responsible for. So
Yeah.
um, I definitely am not responsible for all of that. Like that's a lot of stuff, but I'm involved in all of it in some way, shape, or form because it all it all has some sort of crossover with training.
Okay.
The cadets need to have an understanding of how all this stuff works.
Of course. What a fascinating time to be at the college and
Yeah.
to be talking about best practices as you guys have this intersection of old and new and which is going to be supplementing which. And anyway, I just find it fascinating. Wasn't planning on talking about that, Sergeant. Okay, so Sergeant, before we go back
Tell me,
to like
Jesse.
you are Jesse. Sorry, yes, Jesse. Before we go back to your beginnings, I'm also just curious, like, what is it like for you as somebody who's been on for 20 plus years, seeing these fresh-faced recruits come in, you know, ready to hit the road, or maybe not ready to hit the road? Does that like inspire anything in you, or like what sort of emotions do you feel with the new classes that come through?
Great question. Yeah, I definitely, it is exciting and it is inspiring. And I find the thing that I come back to with every new class and new batch of recruits is I'm just amazed that there is such high quality people that still want to be police officers in spite of uh, the climate over the past few years. There's been a lot of negative media towards police in general, just in the world and North America, certainly. Uh, Many of it for due cause. Uh, and at the end of the day, it's still an important, pivotal role in society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not getting any easier given the advent of what we just talked about, all the technology that's now coming to the police. The amount of gear on a police officer nowadays is probably twice as much as when I was hired 20 years ago. And
Really?
even what I had 20 years ago was probably twice as much as the officers, 10, 20 years before that. So as
Really?
technology advances, the gear advances, the expectations advance, and the amount of expectation we place now on these new officers is it's just unbelievable. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm always just amazed and inspired at these young people who put their hand up and say, well, someone's got to do it. I think I would be good at this. I'm willing to put myself into this difficult job and all of the risks and dangers and potential downsides, like the shift work and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just find that really inspiring, and my
Mm-hmm.
hat goes off as well to our talent acquisition because I have seen the caliber of recruits is very high.
Mm-hmm.
There are issues from time to time with each class, but that's to be expected when you're hiring large chunks of 100
Yeah.
plus people every few months.
You know, I often say too that like I have so much respect for anybody who would sign up for not just like a first responder job nowadays with everything that we've learned about mental health and whatnot, but a police officer in general, because you guys, I mean, just by virtue of the uniform that you wear, you have people that are just going to want to crap all over you and have that attitude, and the cell phone cameras, the 10-second videos that go on the news and without the context. And I think like for people to get over that hurdle. So it's interesting to hear you say that you're always amazed by the high caliber, but I've thought for a while now, like it's only got to be the best. Like you've got to be really passionate about this to sign up for that. And what an amazing thing. And like you
Mm,
said, even like the shift work, just given how life has changed so much and employees are able to demand so much more work-life balance, that people would still agree to this job that's very taxing emotionally, physically, psychologically is so impressive.
mm.
So okay, so let's talk about you, Jesse. Take me back to itty bitty Jesse. Where did you grow up? You grew up like partially in Toronto in Canada, but partially elsewhere. So just tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Sure. So when I was born, my parents lived in East York, and I lived there for about 4 years. My family then moved to Ireland for 7 years, where I was raised in the south of Ireland in Cork and Limerick.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great childhood. I learned Gaelic, I played soccer every day, learned how to play rugby, was introduced to other sports like hurling,
Mm-hmm.
which is an
Hurling?
interesting, it's like a mix between field hockey and like football.
Okay, so I thought you were going to say in curling. I'm like
Yeah, I
curling's
know.
something.
It's like
Really?
field hockey, but you can smash the ball up in the air across the field,
Oh wow.
like a quarterback doing a long pass, and then
Yeah.
someone can run and catch it. So kind of like lacrosse, a little bit like lacrosse.
Okay. Yeah.
Instead of a
Yeah.
net, it's just a stick. So I never played hurling, but I was introduced to it. I saw it played. I fiddled with it a bit. Anyway,
Yep.
so Ireland was great. I really think I owe a lot of who I am to my upbringing in Ireland and just
Mm-hmm.
how I was outdoors a lot, very busy, just with outdoor adventures. The people there have a strong work ethic.
Yeah.
And I think that rubbed off on me as a kid. So when I came back to Canada, I was 11,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a difficult transition because I was coming back to grade 7, 8,
Yeah.
and all the kids at that age have been together for 8+ years. So I
Mm-hmm.
was the new guy coming in from Ireland with the accent and a
With an
weird haircut.
accent. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a difficult time, but we get stronger through adversity sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to learn to adapt and become an individual, and uh, still made friends and was able to have a positive high school experience in
It's
Markham.
it's interesting. It's interesting, like how when new kids come in and with an accent, it can go one of two ways. They're either going to choose to use that to bully you and like, oh, you're the different one, or to embrace you. Like I watch my own kids come home and they're still younger. But they get so excited about the new kid and oh, and who's going to be friend with the new kid. Okay, so I want to continue on this line, but first I just want to ask you a little bit more about your time in Ireland. Are you comfortable talking about why your family moved to Ireland?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was born, my dad was a youth pastor at a church at Pape and Danforth called Calvary Church. And when I was 4, he and my mom, who was also involved in Christian ministry and Bible teaching and that type of thing, they felt called to go to Ireland to help support the local churches and help build churches and plant churches in
Mm-hmm.
the south of Ireland. And so that's kind of what my childhood was. I didn't really know anything else other than my parents were uh, believed in God, and I was taught the Bible growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a big part of who I've become because of
Mm-hmm.
who they are, right? So, and being raised in that type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I also
Were you
think,
involved in that work, like the missionary work over in Ireland? Did your parents give you a hammer to help building some of these churches?
no, it wasn't physical building like that. It was more just the networking and getting people connected and that type of stuff.
Right.
So they weren't actually physically building it.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I wasn't really involved at that age.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved only as a participant, really. I also
Yes.
remember my parents would do summer youth camps for the neighborhood kids, where
Okay.
they'd have the kids all over for summer games and stuff, and they would work in some sort of a Bible story as part of that. And so I remember
Mm-hmm.
being involved in those types of things
Right.
as a kid. But yeah, as far as being involved in the work with them, just more of a spectator and kind of
Yep.
observing from a distance.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so then you come back to Canada, and can I also just highlight the fact that you said you learned Gaelic? Like that's very impressive. I don't imagine you still know Gaelic, or do you?
I don't know Gaelic. There's one line I could say because it's just happened to be the line I guess I said a few times when I came back from Canada as an example. And so I can say Cach mean Leroy agus vrish mean funog.
What does that mean?
And I'm probably not saying it with the right accent. It'd be like Cach mean Leroy agus vrish mean funog. Uh, it means I threw a ball and broke a window, or threw the ball and broke the window.
Okay, wait. So this is the
Yeah.
line that you remember and that you used to say a lot when you came back to Canada. How many windows did you break,
I didn't
Jesse?
break any windows, but like I said, we were playing soccer and baseball and hurling and all these other games with balls and stuff like that.
So you had to be prepared in case that happened to go home to your parents or to go to the neighbors and say,
I have no idea why. That wasn't why. I think it was just I was trying to think of words I remembered. I remembered the word for throw, which is ka.
right.
Fuinog is window. Leroyd is ball, which is
Yeah.
such a weird word for ball, right?
Yeah.
August is end.
Uh-huh.
So I remembered some of those words, and I was able to just kind of put the words that I remembered together to form a sentence.
That's so cool.
But apart from that, it's all gone,
It's
unfortunately.
all
So,
gone.
and then I never learned French either, which was unfortunate because by the
Oh,
time I came back, I was right into high school,
of
and I
course.
only needed one basic French credit, and
Yeah.
so unfortunately, never picked up a second language.
That's right. Well, you know what? I grew up in like the Canadian public school system and took French classes, not French immersion, and my French really sucks, Jesse. So I'm relearning it now through my kids who are in French immersion. So perhaps
Nice.
you can do the same.
That's great.
Okay. So back to Toronto you came, and then you said that you started high school in Markham. Is that right?
I did, yeah.
Okay. So tell me about your teenage years.
Teenage years were awkward, like everybody, I think. It took me a while to find my stride, especially given that I still was feeling like a bit of a reverse culture shock coming from Ireland, which is very like everybody's white there. There's very little diversity, and you know, very little multiculturalism.
Hmm.
So coming back to Canada, I actually, that was interestingly enough, one of the things I really embraced. I loved that Toronto was so multicultural. And I actually found myself gravitating to friendships with other kids from
Hmm.
other cultures that were not Canadian, because I
Mm.
actually identified with them in more ways than the kids that were born and raised in Canada, who all knew how to play hockey and baseball really well. And I found myself with more in common with all the other kids that had come from other countries that weren't familiar with Canadian culture to the same
Mhm.
extent, because that was
Mhm.
me, even
Yeah,
though
you
I
felt
was.
like a bit of an outsider.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And high school was still a positive experience, though. Markham was a great place to go, and I got involved with sports and multiple team sports, learned how to skate and play hockey, played baseball.
Hmm.
So I got involved in all the Canadian sports and really enjoyed those, and eventually played on the high school football team. And that was in my last year of high school, and that was pretty pivotal too, as
Hmm.
part of uh, building my own confidence as a young man, and having enough confidence to think about, could I be a police officer?
Hmm. Okay, okay, so let's pause there, because people watching this, they don't know the context behind why that joining the football team was such a big deal. You didn't think that that would necessarily be possible, right? Because you were a pretty small guy.
Yeah, so at the time, maybe I was 5'7", 145 pounds, in my last year of high school. And I just didn't think that policing was a career that I could do, because I
Mm.
thought you had to be tough and strong. And I didn't even feel like I was tough and strong enough to make the football team,
Mm.
let alone be a police officer. So that was kind of my mentality as a 16-year-old
Mm.
in grade 11, 12. But my last year of high school, I decided, I don't want to let high school pass me by without at least trying,
Mm.
right? And so I tried out for the team, and I think it was just my grit and determination that the coaches liked. I was also quick, because I was smaller, made me a little bit faster than some of the other guys.
Hmm.
And so I made the team. I actually took a starting position on the team,
Wow.
which meant that the guy that had been playing my position as a strong safety for the first 4 years, it made me think like I should have tried out sooner, because clearly I'm on par, at least
Yes.
with that level. So that was really encouraging for me, and a huge boost to my confidence to make the team,
Hmm.
b feel like I'm contributing to the team in positive ways. At that point, I was feeling much more embraced by, I guess, just Canadian culture too, because I had
Hmm.
molded myself to kind of fit in as well.
Did you still have an accent at that point?
No, I think the accent was probably gone in the first year.
Okay.
And I don't know if I tried to have it leave, or if it was just a natural thing,
Yeah.
but the
I
accent,
had a
some
nephew
people
who
still
moved
hear it,
from,
actually. Some people will still hear words that I
really?
say, and they'll be like, "Oh, do you have an accent?" And I say, "Oh, it might be the
The
old."
Irish, the Irish, and yeah, I have a brother-in-law who's Irish and actually from Limerick. And wouldn't that be something if you guys had met each other when you were young? But because it's pretty small there, right?
Yeah.
But he has such a strong accent that many times I'm saying like, what did you say? But also what I was going to say was I have a nephew who had moved from Toronto to Scotland when he was, I think, 8 years old. And now he is 16 years old. And he's like, I remember a couple of years after he had moved there, like talking to him on FaceTime or something and hearing this accent is like, whoa, like kids, they just naturally pick these things up. And just by being in that environment. So it doesn't surprise me that you would get the accent going there and then that you would reverse it on your way back. So before we get into your aspirations to become a police officer, in our previous conversation, like in our phone call, you had told me about, I don't remember if it was one or if there had been multiple instances of sort of like negative kind of interactions with police and your friends as you were hanging out. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like that's in your teenage years, right?
Yeah, so I was probably 17. It was around the time where I was starting to drive. My friends were starting to drive, and
Mhm.
we were going out, becoming a bit more independent. And I got pulled over once by York Region officers, and I'm sure it was because I was wearing a bandana and I looked like some sort of a punk. And that felt kind of negative in the sense that maybe I was being, judged based on my
Mhm.
clothing choice.
Mhm.
And I remember too being in a playground uh, parking lot with a few friends. The police showed up. Maybe there was a neighbor complaint, and the officers were very kind of strict and firm. And sit on the curb, give me some ID.
Mm.
And those kind of stuck with me. And I remember thinking, this isn't really like a good way to police. These guys aren't really making us feel good about this situation. We haven't
Mhm.
really done anything too crazy here.
Had you done anything a little bit
Well,
crazy?
maybe we were making some noise skateboarding, and maybe some of the guys were smoking cigarettes. I don't know.
Marijuana, cigarettes, perhaps, something like that?
Yeah,
Would
certainly
be
not
surprising.
me, but
Yeah,
perhaps some of my
of
friends. Yeah, I
course.
was making sure I was keeping clean away from that stuff at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just remember thinking, if I was a police officer, I think I'd be a bit more personable, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so those were kind of early memories that stuck with me, and you know, I think had an impact as far as, could I do that job? Could I do it?
Mm.
Is there a need for people in that job, better people in that job? And funny enough, I look back at those incidents and I now totally understand why those officers were the way they were.
Okay, so explain that to me.
Well, you know,
Because the
I've got
bandana, pulling somebody over for wearing a bandana, that doesn't sound okay.
that's not okay. No, fair enough with that one. I'm not sure that's the reason. I felt that was the reason.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, I didn't have a front plate on the car,
Mm.
so I got a ticket for no front plate. But I
Okay.
felt like their attention was drawn to me in my car because of the clothing, and I
Right.
was with a friend who also probably had a bandana or something like that.
Yeah.
It felt like it was again, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
So um,
But the hanging out as an
hanging out. So
officer
I've gotten
now.
those calls where you're getting called to teenagers in the park, causing trouble, smoking weed, drinking, whatever the case, and you just never know if there's safety concerns. You're not sure who you're dealing with. Are these people wanted on warrants?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've seen, since I was hired, one of the first officers who was killed when I was a new officer was out in Coburg,
Mm.
and he was stabbed by a 15-year-old boy who was trespassing in a warehouse or something.
Mm.
And so once you get hired and you get trained and you learn about these issues of officer safety and the fact that some people just hate the police and are willing to hurt the police and kill the police, then it starts to make sense why officers have this firm demeanor and this strict no nonsense. I just need to know your name, sit
Mm-hmm.
on the curb, I need to do some checks, just wait, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can't always explain uh, the situation until we kind of know what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what, as my mind goes back to the 17-year-old, seeing the officers show up and barking orders and taking IDs and just feeling very, um, mean
Mm-hmm.
about it. I understand it more now. And again, you can still do it in a way that's professional and not mean.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to be said for that. Um, but at least I see the other side now as well.
It's really interesting that you're able to offer both perspectives and to have that memory like so firmly in your mind and be able to reflect on that. Okay, so I mean, those are a couple like pretty negative interactions that I think people would understand if you said at the time, like, I don't like the police because this is how they treat me, because people I hang out with or what I wear or whatever. So why did you want to be a police officer? Like when did that start for you? What was driving that?
Well, to be honest, like those weren't super negative experience. Let's be
Mm,
honest. I think, I've heard plenty of stories from other officers who had much worse stories,
okay.
and other people who aren't officers. So there's lots of stories that are much worse, unfortunately, than that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but those were just enough to kind of be in my mind as far as, oh, this is a career. I'm seeing somebody, acting out a career, and what I thought an officer to be and what I'm now seeing, there's a bit of, incongruence there,
Mm.
right?
Like
And
what? Well, I mean, you've spoken a little bit about it, but What did you see an officer as back then that intrigued you? Like, what were the positive parts?
Well, it was the protector of society, the guardians, right? Shaking the kids' hands and handing out stickers at parades, right?
Mm,
As a young kid, that's your exposure to the police. And then you become a teenager and you end up in these positions where you and your friends are hooligans and
mhm,
doing mischief at times. And that draws the attention of the police. And now your interactions are a little bit different.
mhm,
The tone is different.
mhm,
Um, so my understanding of police started to change.
mhm,
And so yeah, I don't know how much weight I could put on that as those experiences as far as leading me to policing as a career,
mhm.
but certainly things that I remember.
So you knew you wanted to be a police officer, and then you talked about this whole, making the football team, and it's like, well, if I can do that, then maybe I could become a police officer. So where did it go from there?
Yeah, so the football team was a big boost, and then I started thinking, okay, well, maybe the size and the strength isn't as big of a hurdle as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I knew coming out of high school, I didn't think I could withstand 4 years of university. I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel like I had the patience to be academic in an academic world for another
Mm-hmm.
4 years. I was very restless and wanting to just get out in the world and start working and experiencing life.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that students don't, but I wanted to be working hands on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking at other options, came across the Police Foundation's programs at various colleges, ended up signing up for Seneca Police Foundations out in King City.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 2 year program. I was able to live at home, save some money. And my thought was this is a lower investment. It's less of an investment
Yes.
financially and time wise
Mm-hmm.
if I start this program and I decide that this isn't for me.
Yes.
But it went the other way. I really enjoyed it. Everything was super interesting. I started more and more seeing myself in that role as a police officer, seeing the importance of that role in society. Of course, many of the instructors are ex-police officers, and you can tell that they're excited and passionate about their careers. So that rubs off on you as well. And uh, when my second year of Seneca started, I started to do all my ATS testing.
What's that?
That's where it's a basic aptitude testing where you have to do a physical test, a written test. There's some puzzle type analytical thinking tests.
Mm,
And these are tests you have to pass in order to get a certificate from the
mm,
Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. It's like a basic minimum requirement
mm-hmm.
before you can even apply to the police service.
Right.
And so I started to do those tests and obtain that certificate during my second year of college.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get that.
Did that come easily for you? Like, I've met a lot of officers who the physical component, for example, it's like they had to try it over and over again, either like pulling that dummy or whatever it is. Did that come easy for you, or was it difficult?
I remember being stressed about studying and scheduling all the tests and going in and writing them. But I didn't fail anything. I didn't have to rewrite anything. So um, whether or not it came easy, I remember it feeling hard, but at the same time, I was successful without
Mm-hmm.
having to redo. So that was,
Mm-hmm.
and then my strategy was to just apply basically everywhere.
Yeah.
I thought,
And in the GTA, there's a lot of options. Are you talking everywhere or just like
I
GTA?
applied, I think, to 9 police services.
Wow.
So Toronto, Durham, York, Peel, South Simcoe, Barrie, OPP, Niagara, Halton. That might have been
Wow.
10. Actually, I didn't apply to Peel, so 9 or 10.
That's interesting. Like you just
So,
jumped over Peel
well,
and
Peel at the time had their own specific testing where your
oh,
certificate wasn't
okay.
valid. I think
Okay.
that's all changed since then.
Uh-huh.
But at the time, yeah, I just didn't go through their individual testing. That was
You
separate.
already had 9 other police services that you
I
were.
had the other ones, yeah.
Yes.
So I knew that could work against me because
Yeah.
people might be concerned, well, how much do you want to work for our service?
Oh, really? Yeah. Interesting.
And when I started to go in for interviews, and I think I did 4 or 5 different interviews, kind of concurrently, all that my applications were active.
Mm,
And that when that question came up, I just was fully transparent. I said, I'm a young guy with very few strings attached to anything, and I'm ready to move wherever it takes because I just want to work and start getting involved and
mm-hmm.
police officer.
Yeah.
And in my heart of hearts, Toronto and York were my first choice
Mm.
because of that's just where I grew up,
You
East
grew
York,
up, yeah.
Markham. So that's just what I was most familiar with. So I'm certainly happy I was hired with Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
and don't have any regrets with that. And I was actually hired before my second year of Seneca ended. So I was
Wow.
on the Toronto Police payroll, being trained at the Ontario Police College while my friends were all writing their final exams.
Wow. How
Yeah.
old were you at that time?
I was 19.
Wow, 19, just a
Yeah.
young buck.
I turned
So,
20 at the Ontario Police College. And part of
wow.
another quick reason as to why that happened so quickly, or why I was so young rather, is because when I came back from Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
I discovered that the curriculum was more advanced in Ireland than in
Mm,
Canada at the time. So
right.
I was given the option to move up a grade, which I took.
Oh, wow.
And so I was actually throughout high school always the youngest in my class by about a year
Right.
and a half because
Amazing.
I was essentially a grade ahead. So
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so you get hired by Toronto Police, you go to the police college. Where do you start your career as a police officer?
I started at 32 Division, which is Yonge and Finch area.
Mm-hmm. And how
And
was that?
it was great. It was a great place to start. My shift was amazing. Uh, I felt like I hit the ground running, and there was some things that mentally were difficult to adjust to, just this
Mm,
authority and having to arrest men in their 50s for domestic violence
mm.
when I was 20 years old
Yeah,
and
what was that like?
not in any kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more awkward than anything. Difficult's not even the right word because I was still able to do it without any issue and
Mm-hmm.
usually there with other officers that are supporting you and working with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember getting some comments from some guys I'd arrest. They'd look at me and be like, you brand new, like, what do you know about life and marriage? And I would just tell them, like, yeah, you're right. I don't have the experience you have, but I'm here to enforce the law, and I know you've broken the law. So
Mm-hmm.
what else can you say?
But I know
Just,
you're not allowed to, I
it
know you're
is
not
what it
allowed to beat
is.
your partner.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So there were some awkward moments like that, but you get past them and then you build your confidence to the point where I don't think people see the age as much because they see that you're confident and competent,
Mm-hmm.
and they just what's the point of chirping to an officer about their age or experience when,
Exactly.
like you said, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So
You're breaking the law. You're going to have an officer. It doesn't matter how old they are. Okay. So then let's talk about what your perceptions of policing were before you became an officer. And did that change once you started? Because you hit the ground running and you're jumping from call to call to call. Was there
hmm.
anything that surprised you?
uh, Similarly to now, where I look at the quality of people being hired, and I'm inspired and amazed at the background and the life experiences that people have.
Mm,
I remember feeling that way as a new officer too, 20 years ago, working with my colleagues, just being amazed at not just their experience and their wisdom when it came to dealing with calls and making decisions, but their life experiences and their
mm,
backgrounds. this
mm,
this is an incredibly diverse police service, and I remember just feeling that in Toronto at 32 Division on my shift, E
mm,
platoon, and just being very aware of how awesome my colleagues were,
mhm,
and they were very supportive. I would definitely get made fun of a little bit for my age and some of the my quirks and naiveties that come with being so young,
mhm,
but I knew that it was in a spirit of support and
mhm,
acceptance, and it
mhm.
never felt like I was being bullied. It always felt like I was joking around with my friends.
Yeah.
I always felt like I could throw a joke back as well if the occasion called for it.
Do you remember like what some of those backgrounds were of your colleagues on E Platoon when you were starting out? Like what was it that amazed you so much?
Yeah, there was one man who was Italian and had immigrated from Italy and overcome some of the same challenges that I felt I was going through coming from Ireland.
Mhm,
He owned a commercial property downtown that he rented out, and I just thought, wow, like he's really planning ahead for his financial future and his
mhm,
family's future, and that stuck with me. And I've had an interest in real estate because of
mm,
that. I worked with one guy who was a professional bodybuilder.
Mm,
Actually, two of them on my shift were professional bodybuilders, and they would go into contests and
mm,
compete. And, and I remember they'd always have their specific meals with them in the car, and they'd have to eat at certain times. And that was intriguing to me because that was just a whole other level of discipline and really kind of dialing in your nutrition and your working out. And
mm-hmm,
of course, at that age, as a new officer, I was interested in fitness. So
mm-hmm,
seeing other people who were just leaps and bounds beyond my understanding in these
mm-hmm,
areas was just inspiring.
mm-hmm,
And then, I had female officers who I worked with who were just as tough as the guys, and that was good to see right off the bat
mm-hmm,
that any preconceived notion that I may have had about females on the job was immediately squashed.
mm-hmm,
And and I had so much respect for the female officers. They were super helpful for me as well in certain investigations that I was working on. Um, I could tell more stories, but you
probably.
get an idea. Like everybody was such an individual, and
Yeah.
some people really were interested in investigating impaired drivers and doing ride spot checks. Like everybody had their own unique,
Their niche.
yeah,
Yeah, what they were into.
yeah.
Okay, so Jesse, what one other thing, and I'm sort of backtracking a little bit here that I want to ask you because you had mentioned near the beginning of the conversation about your parents and the missionary work that they did and how you really grew up learning the Bible and how that's informed the person that you are today. Did that inform your decision, or perhaps if there was an initial reluctance or whatever, but I guess what role did it inform in your becoming an officer, being a Christian man who's, very religious? Did
Mhm.
that play into your decision at all?
Yeah, well, yeah, I did. And there's a lot that could be said for that. So I'll try to keep it as concise as I can. Um, Certainly the idea of morality, having a moral code. Anybody with a faith background certainly would have a moral code.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even those without, obviously, but um, certainly that was a big part of my life. The idea of right and wrong, good and evil,
Mm-hmm.
this spiritual battle that exists in the cosmos, in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I came to see the police as um, guardians for good in that battle,
Mm-hmm.
warriors for justice, trying to ensure that good is winning that fight
Yeah.
over evil in the world. And I still see it that way in
Mm-hmm.
many regards. One of the big challenges that I had to overcome as a teenager, as I thought about policing as a career, was the idea that I knew police officers carried guns and were expected to use them in certain situations if they or someone else's life was in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I struggled with that. I still do. But at the time, I struggled with it under the capacity of, can I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have the ability to take a life? Am I willing to do that? Do I feel that is morally right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was struggling with that and wrestling with that in grade 10 when I had a guest speaker come to my class. And I don't know if I told you this in our earlier chat, but my grade 10 law teacher, his name was Gary Ellis.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a guest speaker one day whose name was also Gary Ellis.
To Gary Ellis?
They had met randomly somehow and stayed in touch.
Wow.
The guest speaker, Gary Ellis,
Mm-hmm.
was a superintendent with the Toronto Police,
Oh, wow.
and he was a Christian man.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about policing and told a bunch of great stories. He wasn't there to talk about his faith or share his faith, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a few things he said in the presentation I remember that to me um, made me think he was a Christian or
Mm-hmm.
a person of faith. So I remember approaching him after the fact, and I asked him, "Are you a Christian?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm interested in policing as a career, but my concern is lethal force, taking a life potentially." And he kind of understandingly and knowingly nodded, and he said, "Well, I encourage you to go read Romans 13." He said, "That is a passage in the Bible written by one of Jesus's apostles, And I've taken some comfort on this topic from that passage.
Mm.
And so I did read it, and that passage talks about how governing authorities are instituted by God, and they are there to essentially bring about justice to evil.
Mm.
And it says that they don't bear the sword in vain. And so there's an implication, and I know some people might say I and others are reading into the text,
Mm-hmm.
but the implication that I took from that at the time was enough to justify entering police,
Mm-hmm.
entering the police world in spite of the potential to take
Mm-hmm.
force. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, I believe there's this battle between good and evil. I believe
Mm-hmm.
that's true in the world. I believe that uh, there has to be good people that stand up against evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took that extra step to, and I accept that some of those good people have to use force in order for that good to succeed against evil at times. At
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know fully what that meant at the time. Of course, over 20 years of training and being in difficult situations where I've had my gun pointed at people
Oh, wow.
and finger on the trigger at times.
Mm.
Now I have more of an understanding of
Mm.
of of what that might mean. But certainly at the time, it was it, I found that was that little bit of guidance that I needed from somebody who I felt understood where I was coming from
Mm.
that spiritual perspective. Because I was still working through the other stuff, the emotional, physical stuff about am I good enough, am I big enough? But it was more, am I spiritually prepared?
Mm-hmm.
My relationship between me and God to take a life and feel
Mm-hmm.
like I haven't done anything wrong potentially.
Mm-hmm. So how, tell me then, like, I know we're really jumping ahead to right now, but in your 20 plus years of policing, like you said a few minutes ago that you still feel that way, that there is the battle between good and evil. But it sounded as though, like, when you were in high school, it was very black and white. There's like there's good people, there's bad people. Has that spectrum broadened for you as a police officer? And has it changed the way that you see things in any way? Like, I can tell that you're still obviously a man of faith, but has your job changed any of those things or broadened anything?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure I could say my job has. I'm sure I could say just life experience in general has.
Mm-hmm.
I think the lines do get very blurred at times.
Mm-hmm.
There are some very good people who do bad things, and there are some very bad people who do good things.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people that are probably back and forth between those lines all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess what I'm referring to is, and what I have referred to earlier in this conversation, is the idea that beyond just us individually and our actions,
Right.
I do believe there's like a spiritual battle
Right.
in the world
Yeah.
and in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, to get there, you kind of have to believe in God and a creator and spiritual beings,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to Big Bang, and there's no meaning beyond the world outside of just
Yeah.
what we can see
Yeah.
and prove with science. So I understand that I'm taking some jumps based on faith when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to miracles like the virgin birth and
Mm-hmm.
Christ rising from the dead and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of what faith is,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. Yeah, of course. So would you say then that your faith informs your job, or your job informs your faith? Or
I think it's probably fair to say both.
mm,
Um, yeah, and I've talked about this before. I did another video for a church where they asked me these types of questions, and um, I think it's fair to say a similar thing that I said then, which is that um, as a Christian, I see myself and my role, my responsibility is to serve God, to
mm-hmm.
bring glory to God and honor to God by being obedient, by being a good ambassador for Him. My job as a police officer is to serve the city and the citizens of Toronto and to be a
Mm,
good ambassador for them and to be obedient and to follow the rules and to be professional and to bring honor and glory to them through my service and compassion and whatever else at least the day may call for. So so then you put them together, and then I see, well, does God approve of my career choice? Well, I believe he does, because I believe God institutes governing authorities. So then I think, okay, well, if I am serving the citizens of Toronto and being obedient to the laws and rules of society and the police service and bringing honor and glory to the police service and the citizens of Toronto, I am also then fulfilling my goal as a Christian, my desire as a Christian, to bring honor and glory to God and to serve God. So I do feel like the two interact seamlessly when done properly. Of course, I'm not perfect. I still do things that dishonor God, and I'm sure I do things that, aren't always by the book within the police too. Don't tell my boss I said
you're a human. You're saying that you're human, Jesse. You're human.
Yeah. So
no, I mean, I'm just really fascinated with this, and I appreciate you being so candid with me, because I am not a religious person. I was raised Catholic, but I don't consider myself religious now. I might be spiritual, but I consider policing a very honorable profession. And it's just interesting to hear your perspective, because so much of what you're saying is in line with what I think and what so many other officers who have not identified themselves, at least, openly, or offered up their faith in the conversations, believes. And that is, to do good and to serve. And so many, like, all those values are essentially the same. If you extrapolate what you're saying, it's everybody's on the same page. So this job really it makes sense. But it's interesting to hear about the initial struggle that you had to get to that point. And I imagine that there's been various struggles along the way. But unless you want to add anything else about that, there was something else I wanted to ask you about. And that was, I know this program isn't going on right now, but your Project O that you were involved with, and I know it ended during COVID, but can you tell me about Project O? Where were you? 53 division? Where were you?
I was 52 when it's
52.
Actually, no, scratch that. I was at the Transit Patrol Unit.
Oh, okay.
Which no longer exists. So Project O ran for 7 years. It was definitely one of the highlights of my careers. It really tied together a lot of my favorite things. And I really felt like I had an impact and was in my sweet spot when I was running that program. So Project O came about because I was a participant in another Pro Action Cops and Kids program called the Troop Program. It was the camping program. So another officer, Vince and Laura Langdon, both retired now, they used to take groups of at-risk youth to go camping for 3 or 4 nights. Wow. And they teach them canoeing lessons and survival lessons. And it was just incredible. I couldn't believe what a great program it was. So I started thinking, what kind of program could I start to also have an impact on disadvantaged youth using some of my interests? At the time, obstacle course racing was a new trend within the fitness world. And I had just done my first Spartan race. I think it was 2013 in the summer.
This is like the Tough Mudder stuff, or is that the same thing?
Same thing. It was Spartan race. Tough Mudder is a different brand, but same thing.
Yeah.
So I had so much fun. This was like a playground for adults, in my opinion. It was being outside, getting dirty, and doing some stuff a little outside of the comfort zone, which is always nice because you feel like you're growing and you're challenging yourself. And so I had such a great experience with my first Spartan race that I started thinking, okay, I think young people from Toronto would like doing some of these too. And I'm sure there's a lot of disadvantaged youth from our communities that would never even hear about this, let alone be able to get out of the city and participate in one of these. So I applied to Pro Action Cops and Kids for funding, was approved, had some other officers I worked with as well, like, coming up with the program. We hired a former US Marine drill instructor as the trainer for the program. And we did very, very difficult workouts weekly leading up to doing an obstacle course race. So
So
after
what, who are these kids that were part of it? Like how old were they and what sort of stuff were they doing in this training?
we tried to get youth 15 to 22,
Mm-hmm.
no younger than 15 because the workouts were so tough. We found any younger than that, they tended to lack a bit of the grit and mental toughness that they needed
Yeah.
to stick with a really challenging workout. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, we would go to like Riverdale Park and we would do hill repeats
Mm.
with sandbags
Oh, with
and then
sandbags.
like run around the park. And there was like a bar park there and we would use the chin up bars.
Yeah.
We have some dumbbells and some kettlebells. And so we would do a bit of a circuit, like a weight training circuit,
Yeah.
but we would also add in cardio and also hills.
Okay, how many times were you going up that hill?
Sometimes we might do it 15 times, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah. So not like, but and it's not a huge hill, but it's steep and it's strenuous,
Mm-hmm. It is
and
steep.
it's
Yeah.
certainly not something that the average person might just get up and say, I'm just going to go run up and down a hill 15 times,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So we did push the youth and we pushed ourselves in the process, but
And where did you find these youth? Like where did these kids come from?
so one guy, Brian Nickel, he became a friend of mine, and he was a social worker at the Covenant House downtown,
Yeah.
Young Yard.
Yeah.
He was pivotal throughout the whole program as well, and he left Covenant House, joined another program for mental health and addictions at St.
Mm-hmm.
Mike's Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
He was always connected to the world of at-risk youth, and we had some amazing stories of youth and their backgrounds, and they applied themselves to this program. And they were quitting smoking and losing weight and experiencing other breakthroughs in life, getting jobs and using us as work references and that type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and really learning to make positive choices as a result of learning some discipline and hard work through this program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fitness training to me is so beneficial, and it benefits other areas of life too,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's direct or indirect. It's to me it's really good.
So on that note, this seems like a good time to say what the Project O means, what the O stands for in Project O.
Yeah, so the O stands for overcoming obstacles, which was a double entendre for
Mm-hmm.
the physical obstacles in the races that we were doing, but also life barriers and life challenges. And so after each workout, somebody, whether it be one of the adult officers or social workers and or youth, would share a story about an obstacle that they were currently overcoming or had overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And this was always voluntary. We never forced people to share stuff they weren't comfortable with, but we always had somebody willing to put their hand up and share a story. And we had people talking about how they were overcoming drug addictions, fleeing domestic violence, just trying to lose weight, like I said, stop smoking, all sorts of different examples um, of people and their lives that just blew my mind every time you would hear some of these stories.
Did you
And
share your story about the football team, joining the football team?
I did, yeah. So every year I would start sharing my story in the first week, just to
Mm.
kind of get everyone warmed up into the idea of what I was going for with the stories. And yeah, I shared my obstacle as being insecurity. I was insecure about my small size and lack of strength, but I overcame that through just repeatedly trying and being resilient,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that what I perceived as a weakness, which was my smaller size,
Mm-hmm.
actually turned out to be a strength, because my strength on the football team was my speed. And I
Mm.
still credit the fact that I'm a fast runner to
Mm-hmm.
being, the type of body build that I
Mm-hmm.
have, just
Mm-hmm.
naturally. So, similarly to the policing, I just tell them all, I realized there was a place for me, just as there was a place for me on the football team.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there would be a place for me on the police service, and that has been true throughout my career. I've always felt like I've been used for good wherever I am,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and I tried to inspire them through that message to say, look,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how beat up you're feeling in life right now, you are an individual. You have strengths to offer the world. There is a place for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the overarching message of the program. And it was really rewarding. And we built on it over the years too, where instead of just training to one race, we would do multiple races.
Mm-hmm.
Youth would qualify for championship races.
Wow.
Some of the youth we brought to the world championship race when it came to Blue Mountain. a few years back.
Wow.
So that was cool too. It's just seeing some of the youth go from not even being sure they can run a 5K to qualifying, competing in their age group in a world championship.
Wow, that is amazing. And you must have been so proud just as
Oh
their
yeah.
mentor. So how many years did that program run for then?
So about 7 years. So it was 2013 until about 2020.
Until the pandemic,
COVID
basically.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there's another part of your life that we haven't discussed yet, and that is your singing. And we were chatting just off camera before this because I didn't even realize this when we spoke on the phone last time. But you had a bit of a singing career and you still sort of dabble in it. Tell me like where that came from, who your influence was, and what you did with it.
So before my dad was a youth pastor and a missionary, he was actually a pop star and a pilot. He became a pop star to raise money to learn how to
Wait,
fly.
wait, wait, wait. A pop star and a pilot?
He became a singer to try to make money to help him take flying lessons and learn how to fly.
Wow.
But his singing went so well that he became the number one paid touring act in like 1974. And he had a few hits on the radio. The main one was Could You Ever Love Me Again? And the
Okay.
band was Gary and Dave in
Okay.
1974.
Wow.
So he had this whole life before he became involved in Christian ministry.
Wow.
And he was essentially a famous pop star.
Wow.
And so I grew up knowing that, yes, my dad was this very godly man helping the church and helping God. But I also was listening to his record and hearing his pop songs and
Wow.
having this whole, being pulled into the whole music scene. So I
Yeah,
developed,
what an interesting childhood.
oh,
My dad is a
there's
man of
much more I
God.
could
He's
say.
also a pop star.
I'm really trying to like not go off on rabbit trails here. So yeah, so I developed a love for music through his love of music through growing up. He also during that time was writing Christian songs too. So he was always
Mm.
involved with music in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
He was just pivoting away from the pop stuff to like, gospel stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so I had a natural love for music and singing, and because church often involves singing, you end up singing with other people and you discover that you can sing, that you enjoy singing.
Mm.
And so that was kind of a part of my childhood. And when I came back to Markham for high school, they had already started the year that year, and
Mm.
the only spots left for music was in vocals. So I ended up doing some more vocal stuff, which
Mhm.
further cemented the fact that I was a singer and I could do it. I enjoyed it. Um, and then I started writing some songs. And that was right around the same time I was getting hired with the police. It was
Mm.
kind of just a creative outlet for
Mm.
fun. But I would enter my songs into songwriting contests and try to get feedback to see if they were any good. And after a number of years and trial and error and trying to hone the craft, I started winning these song contests
Wow.
until I won a national song contest and won a bunch of money and a bunch of musical instruments and some notoriety through Canadian Music Week and industry judges. And that's when I ended up putting a CD out, doing some shows,
Right.
and uh, that process taught me how hard it is to be an artist and a singer
Yeah.
professionally. And ultimately, I just kind of closed that door and fully dedicated myself to policing instead of trying to live this double life where
What
I was
what
trying
was the biggest challenge? What's the biggest challenge in that lifestyle?
the income isn't coming from one place.
Mm.
It's not like you have one employer and they pay you every 2 weeks.
Right.
You're constantly hustling, and the income is coming from a variety of different places.
Right.
And there's often when you're independent, there's no one that's helping you collect that money from those different
Oh.
places.
Yeah. So you're wearing a bunch of different
When it
hats.
comes to collecting royalties, it's
Mhm.
like it could be a year or two down the road to
Mm.
capture royalties. And even if you have a publisher that's doing it for you, it can
Mhm.
take a long time. And
Jeez.
to be quite honest, especially now in today's world of streaming, the
Mhm.
royalties are not very much.
Yes.
So it's hard to make money from all those various sources. It's hard to collect the money.
Mhm.
It's hard to hold people accountable if you can't collect the money. There's just a number of challenges there that make it very difficult.
Mhm.
Now, maybe it's just that I wasn't good enough to get a record deal and get them to pay me money, and then it would have been maybe simpler.
Mhm.
So I can't speak to people that have had that type of experience,
Mm-hmm.
but I suspect, and I know this even from talking to friends in the industry who do have record deals, it's still very hard for them too.
Mm.
It's a difficult industry.
And you were enjoying your time as a police officer.
I was, yeah, I was. The music was a creative outlet that I enjoyed, that I saw as a bit of a side hustle as well. A way that maybe I could get a little extra money.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I've made money with it over the years, but I can tell you I've spent more on that hobby than I've made on it.
As long as you're getting that like creative outlet out of it and you're feeling fulfilled in some way, then I say that it's worth it. So there was what, like I told you before our call that I was listening to some of your music, and anybody who's interested, just search Jesse Weeks on YouTube and you'll find some of his wonderful songs. And the one that stuck out for me is called Bloodshed in Our Streets. And I'll
Mm.
just read one line. You wrote, "Comfort me as I weep. I shed a tear over the bloodshed in our streets." And I mean, you must have written that while you were a police officer. And I can't help but think that that's inspired by your work as a police officer. Is that fair to say?
It is, yeah. Within my first year, I'm sure I can remember at least one homicide that I was first officer on scene to,
Mm,
and those things stay with you. It's just sad to think of the malevolence in someone's heart that would cause them to take another life out of that evil desire, right?
mm-hmm.
Not out of a desire to protect, like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
but just out of anger and hate, um, that somebody would do that. So that's a tough one to. That's a tough thing that officers and paramedics and other first responders have to deal with on a
Mm-hmm.
semi-regular basis.
And as I mentioned earlier, like a lot of the conversations I've had with officers in these campaigns, we've talked about like mental health. I don't remember if I mentioned it in this conversation, but I think we mentioned it in our phone chat. Do you think that your music then and your songwriting became a therapeutic outlet for you in those early years of policing?
I think so. Yeah, no question. I think a lot of therapy is self-reflection. It's talking to someone. It's getting feedback. And I think songwriting and music is that. When I write a song, I'm reflecting on experiences and what I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm then communicating that to somebody, whoever's listening to the music, and then I may or may not get some feedback on that. So I do think it's a form of therapy in one way or another, and I do think it's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Me and my colleagues here at the college encourage recruits to maintain hobbies as part of their wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that importance. You have to
Mm-hmm.
stay connected to things that you enjoy, outlets that make you an individual and remind you of who you are, because it is easy with police officers who are working shift work, constantly being bombarded with negativity and pain and suffering in the world, to start really feeling the weight of that,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So things that can recharge your batteries and fill you back up again are really helpful and healthy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
I mean, do you recall having that conversation with people at the college when you went through some 2 decades ago? And if so, have you seen a big change now that you're at the college having those very conversations with new recruits?
Yeah. I don't remember that from my training 20 years ago. That's not to say it didn't happen. To
Mm-hmm.
be honest, there's a lot I don't remember from the training.
It's a
Not
long
because it
time ago.
didn't have an impact on me, but I just think I feel like I've lived a bunch of lifetimes since then.
Of course.
So some of the stuff isn't fully still in my mind, but yeah, we certainly make a point of it now. Wellness is a huge topic for the police service and
Mm-hmm.
for us at the college here. And there's been some great initiatives in recent years that have really solidified that, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and some of which I've been able to partake in. We did the mind pin. Uh,
What's that?
it's instead of the fit pin, which is more of a physical test.
Yeah.
The mind pin is a 30-day challenge where it's all about mindfulness. It's kind of reflecting on how you're feeling that day, taking deep breaths,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it gets into a little bit more of the psychology around anxiety, depression. Not sure if I'm summarizing it accurately, but
No, but it's just, it's
it's very
interesting.
relevant and
It
how
makes you mindful about your
Mhm.
mental health, and
Yeah.
it's putting it on, it's putting it on the map. It's putting it on your to-do list. And that in and of itself, I think, is very powerful.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to earn one of these pins now.
I'm
I'm
sure
trying to be more mindful.
we could get you signed up somehow.
I think you probably need to be a Toronto police employee, and I'm just sort of a contractor. So, okay. So Jesse, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything else you'd like people to know about yourself, about your policing colleagues, about policing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours, but what I will say, I brought one with me today. I figured at some point we'd get into the topics of my faith and how I feel about that. Gary Ellis, the man who pointed me towards Roman 13.
The police officer, not the teacher.
The police officer, yeah. I discovered he was part of a group called the Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers. This is a group of officers who are Christians. I looked into the group as a young officer. I signed up for the group. I got involved with it, and I have found that it has been helpful for me. There's a lot of supports out there for police officers, but early in my career, I didn't feel that there was anything that there wasn't a lot of people or places I could go to ask questions from that spiritual perspective, like what I was struggling with when it came to, taking a life, the morality around that, right? So a group like the Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers has other officers where I could go to with those kinds of questions. So I've been involved with this group for a while. One of their recent initiatives is to give out these Bibles for free. They're called the Peacemakers. I'll just hold it up to the camera. It's a police branded New Testament.
Oh, wow.
And what it has is interspersed in the pages of scripture. There are devotional stories written by other officers. So you can see here, there's some scripture and then there's a devotional, is God in control? And that story was written by, let's see who it was written by. A former Michigan State police trooper, currently serving as a chaplain in Michigan. So there's like 5 or 6 stories here written by officers with faith, and it's interspersed throughout the Bible. So it's kind of a good reference for anybody that's interested. We give them out for free. They can contact me or the Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers. I just thought that was worth mentioning because I still have a bunch.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably going to be police officers who watch this, because I think a lot of police officers do, who share your faith and would reach out. And because, I mean, it doesn't matter what your faith is, there's going to be times in any job where you're doing the job because of your morals and your desire to serve and do good, that you're going to question different things and try to have those moral conversations in your head, but hopefully with other people, on how you can do it in the best possible way. And policing is certainly one of those areas where it can never just be black and white, because you're dealing in the currency of human beings, and we're complicated and we have feelings and emotions, and well, those are sort of the same things. But I so appreciate you sharing that, Jesse, and sharing your journey with us. I'm pumped about this conversation and very grateful for it. So thank you.
Well, thank you as well. Enjoyed it.